Coming up on this week's episode of TechSNAP, it's been a bad week for mobile security. We'll go through a few of the major vulnerabilities that have come out this week, plus Java's continued troubles, and the big password leak from a really well-known organization. And we'll cover moving from Apache to Nginx, answer a big batch of your questions, and so much more on this week's episode of TechSNAP. Hi everyone, and welcome to TechSNAP, Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly systems network and administration podcast. We filmed this episode live on September 27th, and it is episode 77 in a row. This episode's brought to you by GoDaddy.com, and I'll tell you more about them as the show goes on. And the live stream is powered by the amazing ScaleEngine.com. My name is Chris, and we're joined every single week by our host, the admin, the professor, and the tech, Alan Jude. Hey there, Alan.
Hey, Chris.
Hello, sir, and welcome to episode 77. Guess what? We have a big show today, don't we?
Yes.
The security news has really become a prominent aspect of this show, and this show, when we started 77 weeks ago, it was really when the PlayStation 3 network was breaking, and
yeah, it's like I remember the kind of like the pre-episodes,
right?
That we just had notes. We never actually recorded any beta episodes or anything, but
yeah.
The original intent of the show was quite a bit different.
It was, but
or just to see what it looked like when we first decided that we should do a show. And then once we kind of had a bit more of an idea of what we would do and we picked a name, that changed it quite a bit. And then the news in the first couple of weeks changed it a bunch more.
And it's just been fascinating to watch all this stuff go every single week. So boy, do we have a bunch to cover this week. We've also got a great Q&A. People send in a bunch of really good questions. We'll get to those. And an awesome roundup, including a follow-up story and a few other interesting things. I realized something we've never really mentioned on this show is we actually have some Android apps out there. If you want to get TechSNAP on the go or any of our other Jupiter Broadcasting programs, we got a couple of choices for you. First up is the newest one in the club, and that's Callisto here, made by Not Bryant in our IRC chat room. This one's great because it lets you tune into the live audio stream, play the back catalog, pull down our live calendar schedule, donate to Jupiter Broadcasting, join the chat room, and send in feedback to any of our shows. And it's got the whole back catalog right on demand too, which is really nice. All audio. Now, which is really handy because there's a wide range. It can go back to Android 1.6. So if you've got an older Android device, this will stream our content over 3G for you. Now, if you got a slightly newer Android device and maybe you want to do video, like say you got LTE in your phone or something like that, or maybe even just a really great 3G connection, Shane Kufel's made an Android app called just Jupiter Broadcasting. So we have Callisto, that's the first app, and Jupiter Broadcasting, that's the other app. And the nice thing about this app is it has access to the video library and also the live stream video. So if you want to watch live video on like a tablet or something like that, this is a great way to do that. And it works great on my Samsung Galaxy Tab 7, which I actually just got working again recently, which is really great.
Nice.
And you could also get the back catalog of TechSNAP or any of our other shows using this app too. So I just wanted to give a little plug to those because I don't think we ever mentioned them on this show, and I've mentioned them on last, and I think we have a lot of cross audience, but I know there's some folks that just watch TechSNAP and some folks that just watch Linux Action shows, so I figured give them a quick plug so that way people want to get this show on the go. They can. One last thing, too. You can also load our extensions in your browser directly. I know that sounds a little crazy when I actually say that out loud, but it's pretty harmless. In fact, we even post the source code on GitHub if you ever want to check it out or make a feature request. You load this affiliate plugin into your browser, either Chrome or Firefox, and then it automatically tags our affiliate participants when you're at their website and contributes a portion of your shopping session to Jupiter Broadcasting. Keeps these shows on the air, keeps our advertising down to a minimum, and it gives you a way to contribute to our network without impacting your budget because you're doing it through the purchases that you're already going to make. So you can find links to that, all of those things in the show notes. We're good about that. We're good about those links. All right, Alan, well, should we jump into our first news story this week?
Sure.
All right, what is it, sir?
Virgin Mobile customers, Virgin Mobile's a cell phone carrier in the US, may actually be vulnerable to having fraudulent charges on their credit card or changes to their account or having their phone number stolen.
No kidding.
Yes. Well, not so much anymore, but when the story broke, it was. So Virgin Mobile customers in the US access their customer portal on the Virgin website by using their phone number and a 6-digit PIN number. So in addition to the obvious lack of security of using such a limited key space, right? 6 digits and they're only digits. There's no letters allowed. Means that, it's fairly easy to guess someone's password. But the important thing is it seems that Virgin's portal doesn't implement any type of lockout or intrusion detection.
Oh. So you can bang on it.
So you can basically sit there and keep attempting different passwords on a specific phone number until you get the right one.
Yeah, well, that's no good at all.
Right. So specifically, they do not block IP addresses after hundreds of failed attempts, meaning an attacker can quickly just run through the entire 1 million possible keys and get into your account. If you remember, this is actually how the admin section of Twitter was compromised a couple of years ago. So Kevin Burke, the researcher who discovered the flaw, said that he made several calls and emails with the parent company, Sprint, because Virgin's it's called like a virtual carrier on top of the Sprint network, in which he attempted to warn them about the exploit, although he was mostly ignored and had his concerns dismissed. So later, Virgin took down their website and then put it back up with a fix, but the fix blocked users after 4 failed attempts, but it did so by using browser cookies. So basically, every time you loaded the page, it would ask you how many times you've failed so far. Okay, and then if it was more than 4, it would stop you from trying again. But obviously, you could just delete the cookie and then try more. Right? Not a good way to do it. In addition to how easy it is to clear the cookies, most attack scripts don't even use the cookies. Right? So they would just ignore the cookie when it was assigned and they wouldn't return it every time. And so it didn't actually stop the attack scripts anyway, because they just ignore cookies because they don't need them. They're not actually logging in and doing something automatically. They're just finding logins that work and then passing those off to a person to actually exploit. But eventually, Virgin took down their website again and put it back up properly, and now it blocks your IP address after 20 failed attempts.
Okay.
And instead returns a 404 error when you try to access the page, which is technically not correct. It should be a 503 or I think there's a 406 or something for rate limit exceeded or something. But it stops people from brute forcing your Virgin account, so that's something. But once they got in, the number of things they could do is kind of scary. One of them would be order a new handset without a contract. So that would be about $650 for a newish phone, paying for the whole device and having it shipped to them on your credit card that was already on file. All right, because your credit card's on file with them, so they don't ask for the credit card number, so the attacker can just order a bunch of stuff on your credit card.
Right, which is supposedly a convenience feature for the consumer.
Yeah. And they could also port your number to a different device. So especially if you're using two-factor authentication for banking or something that's based on SMS, or how we saw with the Apple iPhone hack a little while ago.
The iCloud stuff, yeah.
Yeah. If your Google password reset is via your phone, if they can steal your phone number and put it to their device, they can have Google SMS the password reset information to their phone, reset the password on your Gmail account, and take over your Gmail account. And then do all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, they could basically steal your phone number or order stuff on your credit card and a bunch of other problems.
And so Virgin has, the primary fix Virgin has instituted is this 20 password failed
attempts. Yes, so yes, now they block you if you fail too many password attempts. And yes, 20 is a reasonable number. Basically, it's not going to accidentally block anyone who's just not remembering their password, and it will stop bots and so on.
Yeah, well, definitely will stop bots. I mean, it seems, I guess, I wonder if there is a way to still limit it down so there was a smaller range you could try. But I guess at 20...
20 is pretty small.
Yeah,
I have 20, a key space of over 1 million, right?
Yeah.
Or of 8 million. Of course, as we'll see in a later topic, people are really bad at picking passwords.
Yeah, boy. The thing that, Alan, where this registers and rings bells with me, and I just wonder if you've thought about this very much, is, and kind of going to tie with another story we're going to cover, but there's a big effort underway to push our phones into like mobile payment devices, like portable wallets. Yep. And a lot of that, in a lot of those circumstances, I think the payment processing would likely be going through the carrier, or at least the carriers would like to have it that way, right?
Yes, because the carriers would love to... basically become banks and hold money for you.
Does that scare the hell out of you?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I just and so
I don't trust my phone company with my money.
Right, and when you hear of like these fundamental issues where they didn't even implement like a lockout, you think, boy, if the front door, that's like the front door not even being locked, right?
That reminds me of a story that I meant to include from a couple of weeks ago that kept getting pushed and really needs to be in this. I'll have to be next week, I guess.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
If
you thought the traditional way of paying for stuff was secure, it's not.
Oh well, great.
Big tease for next week.
I always kind of I don't know. I hear this kind of stuff and I think this is hopefully not the way of the future. Because these guys are this is not their bag. They're not good at doing this, obviously. Telcos have always been notoriously insecure in the most fundamental ways. It's like it's just systemic in the industry or something. I don't know what it is. No offense to any of our sysadmins out there who work in the telco industry. I'm sure you guys are doing everything under your power to make it not so, but it seems to be what happens. It's often, I'm sure, just at the application level. So, speaking of the application level, should we talk a little Java?
Yes.
All right.
So Security Explorations, the Polish research firm that uncovered the previous exploits, remember they had sent like 20 some odd of them to Oracle when we talked about them last a couple of weeks ago? Well, the number of vulnerabilities they've found in Java and reported to Oracle now exceeds 50. Each of which has been provided with technical details and working proof of concept code. And specifically, the 50th one is a doozy. It's basically the worst one they've ever found. And basically, all of the flaws affect a fully patched Windows 7 machine using any of the major browsers. Firefox, Chrome, Safari, Internet Explorer, Opera, so forth.
Wow.
Oracle has produced a comprehensive status report that they gave to Security Explorations talking about, now that there's 50 different vulnerabilities that are being addressed. Because you remember the latest fix, that emergency fix we got a couple of weeks ago, only fixed 2 or 3 of the specific issues.
Yes, I do remember.
The ones that were being actively exploited. But according to the status report, the Java Critical Patch update that will come out in October claims to have fixes for all the issues except for number 29 and number 50. And that's currently being tested for deployment in October. They're still evaluating a fix they've come up with for issue 50, and depending on how testing goes, it may or may not be included in the October update. Of course, there's no reference to what's happening with issue number 29 that isn't patched and apparently won't be patched.
We've gotten a fair bit of feedback in the Reddit that says, don't be so hard on Java. It's still a very good utility. But you just hear this stuff and you think, boy, the people have got to be looking at a way to transition away.
But it's kind of annoying for me because all of the remote management tools, the IPMI stuff for all of my servers, uses Java.
Yeah, it does.
Specifically so that, people like us that use Linux as their main system and so on can run the tools, right? Nobody wants stuck with Windows-only tools.
Yeah.
But basically, I have it disabled on all my browsers, so it causes a bit of an issue. Of course, Supermicro makes a nice tool called IPMyView that gives you a desktop app, and then I only launch Java through that, never through the browser, and that keeps me a little safer.
That is very handy.
But I do not run Linux on anything ever. But anyway.
Wow.
Some people do. But anyway, this exploit affects Java 5, 6, and 7. If you remember, the previous one didn't affect Java 6. Or it was only in 7. But this number 50 here affects 5, 6, and 7.
5, 6, and 7 in a row. Well, that's good.
Well, 5 has been dead for quite a while.
Yeah,
but some people still use it.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And, as Java claims, when you run the installer, they have, billions of devices that run Java. The scary thing is a lot of phones have built-in versions of Java that you don't get upgraded.
Right. Especially the older phones.
Yeah. Ones that aren't supported at all anymore. And people are still using them, and could be a major issue.
Yeah.
There's also a link here for a bunch of additional coverage on the vulnerabilities and the status and so forth from ThreatPost.
There you go. Links to that in the show notes. Now, Alan, this next story sounds like this could be potentially serious, but I haven't heard a lot of buzz about it. Am I misunderstanding something here?
It's hard to say.
Okay.
So the IEEE, which is the something to do with electrical engineers, I think, isn't it?
The IEEE Standards Board?
Yeah, but what does IEEE stand for originally?
Boy.
It's like the International...
The Book of Knowledge could tell you.
Sorry, the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers. Yes.
There you go.
So yeah, they set a lot of standards, including like Ethernet and Wi-Fi and so forth.
Yeah, well, what do you think IEEE 1394 comes for FireWire? That's
yes, or IEEE 803.11 for wireless, or 802.3 for Ethernet, and so on and so on. Anyway, so a researcher was just randomly browsing around an IEEE FTP site, likely to find something that was on there, and came across what was a log file for their website, or part of their website. The problem is that the log file apparently also contained passwords, usernames and passwords from when people logged into the site.
Oh, no.
So the log file contains about 375 million lines, about 400,000 of which contain plain text username and passwords. And so he isn't releasing the file, obviously, and he's told the IEEE about it, and they pulled the file down and forced all their users to reset their passwords and so forth. But there's a lot of interesting statistics out of this log file and the passwords and so on.
Well, that's always the fun part, isn't it?
Yes. For example, 17,000 password resets within the time span, which is approximately August 1st through September 18th. So not quite 2 months, and in that time, there were 17,000 password reset requests.
Wow. Well, good.
Seems like a lot. Of the 400,000... sorry, this is before the vulnerability was disclosed. So these password resets are regular ones, not after the, when they forced everyone to reset their password.
Yeah.
So there were 400,000 plain text username and passwords, but it was only 100,000 unique usernames. So that means those 100,000 people on average logged in 4 times over a period of more than a month and a half. The scary thing is 7 out of the top 10 passwords were all numeric and some variation of 1, 2, 3. Mostly 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0, and so on. Basically every iteration of, the top row of your keyboard there.
Right.
Other popular passwords included IEEE 2012, IEEE 2012 in all caps, the word password, library, and in uppercase admin 123.
The IEEElog.com has some really cool visuals, too, that I'm showing to the video.
They have some breaks down using the Google Chart API, showing where people logged in from, what browser they were using, what time of the day they used the site, and so on and so on. Also, 38% of all the users at the IEEE that logged in that time period used Gmail.
Yeah.
So quite a high number. And 7.6% of them used Yahoo. And then the next biggest was Hotmail, and then it quickly fragments from there.
This is some great technologies using for the charts. They're interactive, and I think they're HTML.
It's the Google Charts API.
This is
the next version of the Scale Engine control panel uses them.
Oh, really?
Yes. You'll have them for your viewer graphs and so on.
Mwaha! Cool, right on.
So it does not appear that the IEEE was sad enough to actually store usernames and passwords in plain text in their authentication database.
Okay, good.
But it's unclear how or why the passwords are in the access logs from the web server. Like if they were somehow done as a get instead of a post, which seems really bad, or if it was HTTP basic and they logged the password. I'm not sure, but basically the password should never have been logged. And they were. And then that log file should never have been posted on the FTP site, and it was, and so on and so forth. And that log file had been accessible basically for its entire lifetime. So since it was created on August 1st. So anyone that's logged into the FTP site since then may have accessed that file. We don't know how many people that was, or if the IEEE has logs of what file was downloaded by what user. Likely not, because especially if it's a public FTP site, that'd just be a giant waste of log space. The IEEE acknowledged the breach with the short statement, and then they also issued a notice to all their members. And based on the insight we see from that IEEE log there, they suggested that their users pick better passwords because 123456 is not a good password.
As we've discussed.
Yes. Interestingly, probably gets you into most Virgin accounts. There's also some additional coverage from ARS Technica, which points out that a lot of these usernames and passwords appear to belong to Google, Apple, NASA, and IBM employees because they're all major contributors to the IEEE.
Sure, of course. And what the heck they were that log file was ever doing in the first place, and why it was on an FTP exposed area, we'll never know.
But hopefully people that work at Google were smart enough to choose separate passwords for the IEEE login than they use for anything else and won't have any repercussions.
Absolutely.
And it's likely that nobody managed to stumble across this except for this guy, and everything's okay, although we can't assume that.
That's why you always want to use unique passwords at every site and service that you use. Check out LastPass to help you do that, or something like that.
Yes, Chris made a nice video about LastPass that I point people to.
People love KeePass and 1Password too, but I like LastPass because it's very cross-platform, and that includes mobile devices and things like that. Now, I know we have a mobile device story coming up, but I thought maybe we'd give a mention for GoDaddy in between the two. Does that work for you?
Yep.
All right. Well, we have a couple of great deals from GoDaddy, and they are sponsoring this week's episode of TechSNAP. And, of course, GoDaddy loves the show, and they wanted to save you guys some money, so they reactivated a really, really great discount I used this morning. This is my last day to use it. I realized it because, they send you a reminder, and you see it, and you go, okay, fine. They sent me the reminder. That's cool. That's cool. But then you kind of sit on it for a bit. They all expired today. I jumped in there, though. I jumped in there before they expired. I used the code GO20OFF5. I took 20% off the cost of my renewals. And I was renewing quite a bit of domains. Saved me almost $60. So I took $60 right off the top of the price by using the code GO20OFF5 with a big batch of renewals. I'd saved them all up and then used that code to take 20% off. You can use that code to take 20% off anything you're doing over at GoDaddy.com. And if you'd like to save yourself some money specifically when you're getting a .com domain, like JudeFamilyHolidays.com or WatchTheFishers.com, which actually exists, you could buy that at GoDaddy.com using our special .com discount code 599tech. You'll get the .com for $5.99. That's
crazy cheap.
Yeah, I think they literally take the money to cover that expense out of Danica's paycheck. I think that's where they get the money to cover that, because I guarantee you it costs GoDaddy more to provision that domain name than it is costing you to buy it. So $5.99 tech will get you a .com for $5.99. And thank you very, very much to GoDaddy for sponsoring the TechSNAP program for quite a while now. And thank you for those of you who support GoDaddy and thereby support this very program. All right, Alan, should we move on to our mobile story that made my jaw drop this week? What? Okay, so what happened?
So your Android phone may be able to be remotely erased by a malicious website or attacker.
I'm kind of shocked that this isn't getting a lot more play, because honestly, if this was exposed on the iPhone 5...
It did get a lot of play, but...
Yeah, compared to the iPhone 5 gets scratched, I mean, it hasn't got as much play as that, but this is astonishing.
The lack of buzz about it may be due to the fact that Samsung's already fixed the bug.
And how are they rolling that patch out exactly?
That I don't know.
Yeah.
So security researcher Ravi Borganarkars, I can't say that.
Ravi, yeah.
Ravi
Just call him Ravi.
Borganarkar
Robbie's good.
revealed an exploit at EcoParty, which is a European security conference.
Yeah.
An apparent bug in the Samsung TouchWiz UI makes it possible for a malicious website or a remote attacker to actually reset your Android device. So as you know, if you've ever done any type of playing around with your Samsung device, or with any Android or any other kind of cell phone, basically there's a series of codes you can type into your phone to force them to do things. Like to make it check for an update or do a self-diagnostic, or there's one that causes your phone to reset itself to the factory defaults.
This is actually, because it was originally reported as a flaw in TouchWiz, but it actually turns out to be a potential flaw in the Android dialer.
Yeah, and we'll get to that in a second. But basically, if your phone sees a link to a telephone number, so you know how there's links like HTTP : blah, 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 or RTSP or FTP, and there's a bunch of different protocols. One of them is TEL, T-E-L, and then : the phone number, and that is a clickable link for you to dial a phone number. Sometimes the dialer sees that and pre-processes it. I don't know if it's trying to look up the person's name or what, but it can cause it to dial the USSD, which is those little number codes you type in to make your phone do reset to factory. Mm-hmm. And so if a website embeds a link or for example, an image pointing to a tel number, your browser tries to open that image and fires off the dialer app, which then dials the reset code, causing your phone to erase itself. But it's not just a website. That could also come in via an SMS message, a scanned QR code, or through the near field communications chip.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So it's not only websites that can do it.
So through NFC, you could wipe somebody's phone if they had NFC turned on?
Yeah. If you sent them a specially crafted thing that would make it run that telephone number, then it'll dial the telephone number and erase the phone. And yes, as Chris mentioned, the vulnerability may actually be in the Android dialer, meaning that all Android devices are vulnerable, not just the specific Samsung ones that were originally targeted. As a temporary fix, a researcher has produced an app called TellStop, which you basically install as a replacement dialer, and it does a quick look at the phone number to see if it looks legitimate, and then offers you the answer, cancel or call. So basically, it puts a confirmation step between when the tell URL handler is fired and when it actually phones a phone number. And on top of the confirmation dialog, it then makes a recommendation being like, this looks like a phone number, go ahead and dial it. Or this, dials the pound sign and a bunch of other things, is probably trying to erase your phone. You might want to hit cancel.
Huh.
Although there's not a lot of detail about which phones are actually vulnerable, and it appears that it might only be older phones. Like apparently 4.0.4 fixes this, or isn't vulnerable to it. And my phone's already at 4.1 point whatever.
Yeah, but that's only 20% of the Android market.
Right.
And only 1%'s on Jelly Bean.
Right. Well, I've been on Jelly Bean for almost since it came out.
But 60%, and if you aggregate it all together, almost all, a huge portion are on 2 and 1 versions, and they're going to be vulnerable to this.
Possibly. And hence the TellStop app. But yeah, so I got some links to some other coverage here, so you can try to get a little bit more information, including some other example dialer programs you might want to replace yours. I have the Google Nexus S.
I wonder if, on my phone, I use the Google Voice dialer, so I might not be, because my default dialer isn't.
I use the default Android dialer, like the Google one, not a Samsung specific one or anything like that. Because I have the Nexus S, which is the pure Google implementation.
Boy, this seems to me to be another underscore on why you should get a phone like Alan has, like one of the Google blessed phones that get frequent updates, because this kind of stuff.
Yeah. Honestly, the carriers need to do a better job of pushing updates and doing their stuff.
I suppose if this actually started being actively exploited, it would become such bad press that they wouldn't want. They'd have to do something.
Yes, and hopefully that's what happens. Well, hopefully they, this press is enough to make them do it without it actually being exploited. But yeah, Samsung has released new firmware that resolves the issue for the Samsung Galaxy S3, which is one of their newer phones. And I have some links, some more details about that as well.
I wonder if maybe they can patch TouchWiz independently of the main system updates.
Maybe.
Interesting. And links in the show notes for all that stuff. Wow. Well, there you go. That seems like a pretty big one. Any other thoughts on that one, Alan?
No, that's about it.
All right, sir. Then that means the news all done, so it's time for the TechSNAP feedback. Thanks for sending your emails to techsnap@jupiterbroadcasting.com or using the contact form linked at the top of our website or submitting to our subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv. All right, Alan, are you ready for our first, it's not so much a question, but just as a, hey, did you see? This came from from Spleem is his nick, I guess, on Reddit. And he says, I don't know if you guys have seen this, but this is the Open Web Application Security Project, and they have documented on their wiki a password storage cheat sheet, which goes through all different kind of rules you should follow, and something that maybe people who are building a web application and need to do some security storage might want to give a peruse through.
The problem is there's a couple of things in here that are incorrect.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh.
Specifically, it mentions using algorithms specifically designed for the purpose, like bcrypt, which is right. But then it mentions scrypt, which is Colin Percival's encryption system. That's not for hashing. That's for encryption, as in reversible. That's it's meant to encrypt stuff very securely, and it's great, but it's not a password hashing algorithm.
So keep that in mind, everyone.
So yeah, this is a wiki, and not everything here is actually correct.
That happens,
also, it mentions avoiding general purpose algorithms like MD5, SHA1, 256, 512. Well, it's true that you shouldn't use SHA anything for password hashing. There's things like SHA 512 crypt, which is a cryptographic version. Basically does 10,000 loops of SHA 512 and uses a cryptographic salt. That is good enough. So it makes a couple of generalizations that aren't exactly correct either.
Okay.
And then it goes on about talking about making hard to steal salts and like hard coding them into your system. It should be in a config file, not in the source code, most likely. And that would also solve the problem they were mentioning about open source code. And while it's not necessarily a bad idea to possibly store the salt separately, it can cause problems. If you lose one or the other, then you have all kinds of problems. Someone in the chat room asks, is SHA 512 insecure? No, but SHA 512 is designed to hash data as quickly as possible. It's designed to be fast. When you're doing hashing, password hashing, you want it to be slow. So you don't use just SHA 512 because A, it's open to rainbow tables, and B, it's fast. SHA 512 crypt is basically a version of it that does 10,000 or more loops of SHA 512 and does it with a salt, which is a randomly generated value that makes the hashes immune to rainbow tables. If you use a different salt for every user, which is what you should do.
There you go. Wow. Great response, Alan.
But basically, it's part of, rule number 3 in this wiki here is iterate the hash, meaning do it more than once. And, that's one of the parts of SHA 512 crypt. This is in Linux and FreeBSD, the hashing algorithms already do iteration and everything, although the default is MD5. In FreeBSD, if you go into login.conf, you can change that to bcrypt very easily and so on. In Linux, it depends on the distribution, but there's a config file that allows you to set your different hashing algorithms.
You see that there, folks? Alan is answering questions from our live chat room. You should watch the show live.
Yes.
We do it at 1 p.m. on Thursdays over jblive.tv, which is 4 p.m. Eastern. Yes,
and I highly recommend the bcrypt hashing algorithm because, as we've talked about before, it's the one that video cards have trouble with. SHA 256 and 512 hashing can be accelerated by modern video cards and can go really fast still. Although, when you're doing 10,000 loops, you're slowing it down enough that it's not a problem today. But in the future, a next generation of video cards that has a lot more horsepower all of a sudden could do that. Whereas bcrypt is actually slower on video cards than it is on
a CPU.
CPUs right now. And Mrs. from the chat room asked now, is there such thing as SHA 1024? Not yet, and that's actually one of our other stories. We'll get to that in a minute.
Next email?
Yeah.
All right, next email comes from Rutger. And he wants to know the best way to migrate a lot of sites. And I'll give you the list here in a second. From Apache to Nginx. He says, Dear Chris and Alan, thanks for your great shows. I've been listening to Jupiter Broadcasting since the Nginx episode of TechSNAP, and have since changed my exercise schedule to get through TechSNAP, Coder Radio, Last SciByte, and even Unfilter. I'm a freelancer, mostly working from home, so I have a commute of 10 seconds. Since this is not exactly healthy, I've been running for years. Okay, I need to do that. That sounds like now it's getting cold. But I only do it like 2 times a week. I don't like to run with music because the rhythm messes with my pace. That's interesting. And at some point, I get a very original idea of trying Jupiter Broadcasting, since it's spoken content. Yes, it is. Ever since that moment, I've shifted to running every day that I'm home. Wow, that's awesome. And guess what? My endurance has skyrocketed. I wasn't even planning on this. Now I need to find a lot longer route. Damn you. So who knew with all the techie radio shows you could do wonders for you physically. So now on to the question. So this question is mostly for Alan. As noted, I've been listening since the Nginx episode. I've since switched over my own command line managed Ubuntu 12.04 VPS from Apache to Nginx, and it's fantastic, especially with fast CGI caching. Now, I'd like to do this for a client server that I've inherited the management 6 months ago. The company does a lot of internet marketing, and it's running 17 applications in production and serving 21 domains. It's a CentOS 5.8 VPS with a cPanel control panel and Apache. It's got apps ranging from a brand new Symfony 2 site down to Zen Framework, Drupal 7, and even version 6, Magento 1.3, Cake PHP 1.2, and Joomla 1.5. DNS is all over the place. Although I do try to consolidate stuff in Cloudflare, clients aren't always willing and able to hand over their name servers. Basically, my question is, how would I approach this? Do I take out a second VPS, set up everything there, and slowly migrate everything? Or do I leave the old boy here and create newly minted projects on the Nginx server? You know, just like maybe leave it on Apache.
Yeah. So there's a couple things. Basically, there's no control panel app like cPanel or DirectOrBin that really does Nginx configs for you. Although for DirectOrBin, there is a tool to convert existing Apache configs partly. Nginx is kind of, it lacks some of the features that Apache has for managing a lot of separate sites like that. But that's mostly because those features cost performance, right? Like the biggest feature that Nginx lacks that people that use Apache rely on is .htaccess files. Right? There's a little file you drop in a directory and you can put rewrite rules and access control and a bunch of other settings that's per directory.
Absolutely.
Instead, and the main difference there is those are controlled by the user that owns that directory, and they don't have to be in the main central server config, which is usually managed by root. Nginx doesn't have that. And part of the reason is doing that htaccess thing requires Apache to scan every single directory along the tree to where your path is, checking for .htaccess files at each level, right? So if your if your directory for your website is like /usr/home/username/domain/ the name of your domain /public HTML, whatever, that means it has to check every single one of those directories, right? /usr/usr home /usr home username, user home username domains, etc., for htaccess files. And, you know, that's a lot of individual file system checks every time somebody loads a page. And it costs performance. So yes, there are guides on like converting those rewrite rules into the main Nginx config, but if those rules have to be managed by the users and not you, it gets a lot more complicated. And then you're down to maybe having separate Nginx config files in each user's home directory that you then include, but that requires the users to understand Nginx. And it also means if they make a typo in their config somewhere, the whole server's config won't reload.
Oh, okay.
So part of this is the reason why there is no control panel for Nginx. So basically, Nginx is really great for sites where someone is actively managing the setup and is tuning it to make it faster. It's, you know, that's what Scale Engine does. We provide the service of managing the Nginx part for you. And we target a smaller number of very large sites that need this. Whereas if you just need regular Apache hosting, you can go pay $5 at GoDaddy. So for his setup, because he's talking about 17 or so sites, that's a number you can manage by hand. And so he can convert the configs and set it up and do it that way. But when you're talking like 400 domains, you're kind of stuck with Apache. Although if you put Nginx as a reverse proxy just in front of Apache, so you change your Apache to run on a different port and just put Nginx in front of it, you can get a speed increase while still running everything through Apache.
That's probably what you recommend, right?
Yeah. Basically, the reason for that is Nginx will basically sit as a buffer. So Apache spends half of its time doing the work, like running the PHP code, but then it spends the other half of its time waiting for the user to download that. Right? So PHP runs up and makes the result of the page, which is, say, 40 kilobytes. So it sends that to the user, but usually the user will only take like 16 kilobytes at a time, or 16 kilobytes, and then once they receive that, you'll start sending more. And basically, because latency, you know, the average user is 100 milliseconds away and so on, Apache workers spend a lot of their time waiting for the user to finish downloading the page and then close the keep alive connection, which is usually about 5 or 10 seconds after they've finished downloading everything, before that worker can then be assigned to work on something else. If you put Nginx in front of Apache, then basically Apache sends all the data to Nginx over localhost instantly, right? Because it's over localhost. And then Nginx takes care of delivering that to the user, and that Apache worker is now free to serve another page.
Oh, that could be really beneficial on a very busy site.
Yeah, so it allows you to basically keep your existing Apache with the control panel and everything working and get some extra performance out of exactly the same hardware. And then if you get really creative, you can start having Nginx deliver static content like all the just image files, because you don't need an Apache worker that's got PHP, like mod PHP loaded and a bunch of, it's like 100 megabytes of RAM per worker. You don't need that to deliver a JPEG file. So you can have Nginx do that. Although that requires separate configuration for each site and it gets more complicated. So again, Nginx works best for setups where you're dealing with a handful of sites, and less so when you're dealing with a massive number of sites.
Very nice. I will include in the show notes a book called Nginx HTTP Server that it's only $14 on Kindle. And the thing that I think people might like a lot about this book is it specifically addresses migrating from Apache to Nginx, and including a step-by-step tutorial for doing that, commented with configuration sections, in-depth module descriptions, and things like that.
It's fairly easy to convert a configuration. The problem becomes how to manage, the features you get from cPanel into Nginx, especially since some of those features don't exist in Nginx. And so basically, Nginx is mostly a by-hand solution still. And it may stay that way just because it's what it's meant for.
Right. It's supposed to be lean, mean, right?
Yes. And Apache is the solution for the I need everything.
Well, we got another question that fits in with Nginx. Do you want me to read that one?
Sure.
Okay. It comes from Tom, and he's a funny guy here. Let's check out what he's doing. He says, I've been watching for about a year now. I love the show, along with Coda Radio and LAS. I've recently set up Nginx on my Raspberry Pi to see how it performs. Okay, I love this so far. I was wondering if you could suggest any ways of benchmarking its performance. He's also got a submission for the Hall of Shame, but Tom, you got to submit that to the subreddit. It's got to get at least 10 votes. We have a Hall of Shame submitter today. But he says his ISP, by the way, in the UK is who he suggested. But Tom, go submit that. He says, thanks for all the fantastic shows. I've learned almost everything I know about computer security from TechSNAP, and I find it interesting that I plan to make this. I find it so interesting I plan to make it my career. I'm 16 years old. Thanks for all the great quality content. Awesome. So ways to benchmark Nginx. What do you think?
Basically, any HTTP benchmark, which can range from simple stuff like Apache Bench, which is a tool included with Apache. It's AB, and it's basically just tries to load a specific URL X number of times concurrently for X iterations and gives you like the 95th percentile of how quickly it loaded. If you want more real-world performance, there's like webpagetest.org, which allows you to actually benchmark a specific website and see why it's taking so long to load or how long it's taking to load and things like that. There are a bunch of different tools for benchmarking HTTP. But it basically comes down to, what do you want to benchmark? Do you want to benchmark how much bandwidth Nginx can serve? How many requests per second? Are the requests just a static file? How big is the file? Obviously the benchmark of how fast it can deliver a 1 byte file versus how fast it can deliver a 32 kilobyte file will be different. But Nginx is perfectly capable of saturating a 10 gigabit uplink if the rest of your hardware can give Nginx what it needs to deliver that.
Yeah, I would say what would be interesting is to compare the Raspberry Pi against a fairly formidable web server and just see what the differential between those two would be.
Yeah.
It's kind of curious. You could always do a farm of Pis.
Or even just comparing, for a low-power type setup, comparing Raspberry Pi to an Atom-based system.
Oh, absolutely. I would be very fascinated to see that. Well, if you do that, send it into the show.
It's interesting to know that Nginx will run on an ARM chip. I guess I assumed it would, but I've never actually tried it.
All right. Well, Iric writes in, and thanks for providing the pronunciation. He says, why can't you just send the finished hash? He goes on to say, sorry about his bad English, by the way, but he wants to bring up the topic of password cracking again. My understanding is that when you log into a site with a username and password, you hash the password on your computer before you send it over the internet. So if you have stolen the hash version of the password, why do you have to find the original password? Why can't you just send the finished hash? Thanks for the great shows. I watch Last and TechSNAP every single week. Although he's audio only, so sometimes he finds it a little difficult to follow. So he votes for video on all shows whenever possible. Finds it actually easy to understand when he watches the video version.
Yeah. He's misunderstanding there. When you log into a website, you send your username and password to the site, not a hash of the password. Now, normally, if you're doing it over SSL, the username and password you submit are encrypted, but with a reversible type of encryption so that it can be decrypted on the other side. So when you log into a system that's using cryptographic password hashing, you don't hash your password. You log into the system, you send your plain text password, usually over some secure method, but you send your plain text password. Then it looks up your username in its database and finds your hashed password. From that hash password, it extracts the salt and the algorithm, right? So it figures out, is it using MD5 or SHA or Blowfish or whatever, right? So it sees, oh, you're using bcrypt. So I know it's bcrypt, I know it's this many rounds, and here's the salt. So it takes that salt and which algorithm it uses and inputs your password that you're trying to log in with. So it takes the password you're trying to log in with, adds the salt, and runs it through the hash. Then it gets a resulting hash of the password you just tried. If that resulting hash is identical to the one in the database, you log in. Otherwise, you entered the wrong password.
Excellent.
Yeah, so you don't send the hash, and that's why we can't use hashes to log in, because someone could easily steal it. Now, there are some systems that end up using hashes of hashes to attempt to do that. Or to provide something like that. I'll maybe find out more about that one and give a better explanation of it next week.
All right. Well, there you go. Okay. So our next question, I think, is one that's probably plagued a lot of people who have a home ISP connection. They want to put some sort of server at their house, and their ISP block support. Anthony writes in, he says, hi, Alan and Chris, long-time listener to the show, and I've been preaching the patch your S mantra to all my friends. I'm starting a new project for a small customer who wants to save some money, and I've run into a wall. The customer wants to run their own mail server, but they're on an AT&T residential line. Of course, AT&T blocks port 25, which means such a server is no-go. I'm wondering if you know of any way that I can get around this. I'm already aware of stuff like no IP mail redirector, but that means they'll need to temporarily store their mail on a third-party server, which is what they're trying to get around in the first place. They want their mail server to be first-class citizens without any dependency on another service. Any ideas? Thanks for your help and looking forward to another great episode of TechSNAP.
One, don't do that. Two, it's probably a violation of your accessible use policy with your ISP anyway. Three, don't do that. And four, you want to have more than one mail server. You need a backup, right? In case your internet's ever down or the server's rebooting or whatever, you don't want your mail to not get delivered. So you need backup MX somewhere anyway. And you're likely going to end up just buying that from somebody, and then they're storing some of your mail anyway.
What about like using a service like Postini or MailRoute that does spam and filtering for you, and then forwards it to whatever server and whatever port, and if that server ever goes down, it'll queue.
So buffer it, yeah.
He says
that works, and that's kind of what the other service he mentioned does. There's also services like DNS Made Easy has a backup MX option that kind of basically does the same thing.
That'd be good.
But yeah, your ISP blocks port 25 for a reason. Basically, most email you send, if you send via your mail server on residential AT&T, most places are going to either flag it as spam or give it a higher score, making it much easier for it to end up getting flagged as spam, because any email sent from like normal residential type ISP IP ranges is considered spam, like almost automatically.
Yeah. It makes it really hard for your...
Systems like Spam Assassin basically give you a score of like 6 points out of 10 that marks you as spam as soon as it sees that your IP is a residential type line.
It's a problem I've seen a lot where Gmail will just automatically toss it in the spam folder. So does AOL Mail, Yahoo Mail.
Yeah. Well, because the only time you normally see mail coming directly from residential clients is virus-infected computers.
Yeah.
So yeah, most of the time they not only block port 25 incoming so you can't run a server, but they also block port 25 outgoing so that you can't connect to other mail servers to send spam.
What about like
a residential connection is a bad idea. If you want to run your own mail server, rent a virtual server somewhere.
That's what I was going to say, like do a GoDaddy VPS. Throw your own distro on there and start it up. Then you have it from you're not even have to battle that issue. The price is cheaper than most hosted like exchange type solutions.
Yeah,
and that worry about it being on a third party, I mean, that's how email works, right? You think about how many different services an email could get routed through and scanned by, especially if you're sending to a webmail recipient. I just think not wanting the email on another server is not very practical because that's just not how email works. It's probably been relayed through 3 or 4 servers before it's landed on their inbox.
So that's why I recommended a VPS or something. The chat room is asking about using IPv6. Not everybody can connect to IPv6 to allow you to receive the mail. And a lot of those services also block port 25 to avoid being flagged for spam.
Yes. Now, this next email that we got, are you ready, sir, for the next email?
But yeah, even if you get a VPS from GoDaddy to run your mail, you still need backup mail server. And you can get that cheaply from like Postini or DNS Made Easy or something. But you need something to buffer for when your server's rebooting and stuff.
Yeah.
For example, like my email is set up with their 4 MX servers. So that, even if 2 of my servers are down, all my email is still getting buffered and then forwarded to my inbox after.
I like it when my email server goes down. It gives me an excuse not to read email. So that's why I host on Google Apps. Bump. All right. So this next one is just really kind of an off-the-cuff impressions question. Because we haven't really got a chance to play with them much. But Scott wrote in and he said, I wondered if I could get your thoughts on sendfilessecurely.com. It seems like it might be a better alternative to things like Dropbox or sending somebody an email attachment. And so I loaded it up here, Alan. It seems, it's hard to tell with one of these things as long as you seem to trust the service that runs it, right? The whole concept is that you upload the file and they encrypt it.
Yeah, if you're trusting the service, you're doing it wrong. If you want to send the file securely, encrypt it yourself first and then post it anywhere.
Yeah, and using it in conjunction with something like that, that might be a good way to go, right?
Yeah, so you can use Dropbox or this service or whatever one you want, whichever one's cheapest, whatever, but encrypt it yourself first. And then you know that they can't read it. Mm-hmm. If you trust them to do the encryption, you can't trust that they won't accidentally leak it, they won't give it to the government, they won't, screw up somehow or whatever. If you encrypt it and only you have the key, then you can be sure that no one else is reading it.
Right. There you go. Now, before we jump out of the email submissions, you had tossed in a link in here for a follow-up from Rikai from our chat room, right?
Yes. When we were talking about the other day about SSH on different ports and using subdomains, we mentioned that the only way to do that is with SVR records, which basically allow you to give more detail about where a service is, right? You give it a name and then you say, it's on this port on this IP address. And because we were talking about using port forwarding to forward a bunch of different ports to different servers behind your firewall.
Right.
And we said SVR records are a way to do that so you can have subdomains, so you don't have to remember what port it's on. You just have to remember the name of each server. Mm-hmm. But the problem was that I didn't know any SSH clients that actually used SVR records. But anyway, Rikai pointed out on GitHub there is a wrapper script for your regular command line SSH client that will look up the SVR record, find the port number, and handle it all for you.
Beautiful.
So it's a nice little script. Yep. And it would basically allow you to use subdomains to manage your different port numbers.
Yeah. That's awesome. Thank you, Rikai. Gosh, Rikai is just a fountain of knowledge. I love that guy.
Yep.
Now, just a couple of orders of business. Episode 80 quickly approaches, and that'll be the episode we're pre-taping. So we've been asking for, probably seems like a while, but we're almost there. This is episode 77. We've been asking for your submissions of what I wish the new guys knew. Things that new hires need to know when they come into the industry. Maybe you're a sysop, maybe you're a developer, maybe you're a longtime Unix beard, whatever it might be, you wish the new guys knew. We have a thread going already on the subreddit, which we've linked to in the show notes, or you can email in your suggestion to techsnap@jupiterbroadcasting.com. Also, you can flip it on its head if you want. If you're a noob and you wish the old graybeards would be a little more forthcoming with something, you can send that in too. Also, if you want to just have a little bit of fun, you can try to come up with the headline story of the week that'll happen on the episode where we don't record a current episode, so when we pre-tape. Yep. What will be the news week that breaks, and you can leave that in the thread. We'll probably read a few of those in episode 82.
But yeah, that's coming out 2 weeks already, jumping.
I know. And we should mention that Alan will be on the Linux Action Show this Sunday. We're going to do a review of PCBSD. So,
yes, specifically the Warden feature, which is a graphical manager. Also, there's a command line version, though, for managing jails, including meta packages and stuff. It looks really cool.
Yeah, and so if you've ever been interested in trying BSD on the desktop or playing with the jails feature in BSD, that's probably a review you'll want to catch. So.
Yep. Also, how to run Linux inside a jail.
Very cool. I'm looking forward to that. So that'll be this Sunday's episode of Linux Action Show. All right, Alan. Well, that's all the feedback for this week. So I believe that means it's time for the TechSNAP Roundup. And welcome to the TechSNAP Roundup. Yeah, that's what that crazy music means. Now, the Roundup are stories that didn't quite make it to the top of the show. We still want to talk about them, maybe give you some links to do some further reading on your own, put them on your radar, so to speak. And most of the links are provided by our subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv. Thank you, everyone who votes and submits over in our subreddit. All right, Alan, are you ready for the first Roundup story?
Yep.
Okay, it comes from Adobe. Adobe announces a rapid release cycle for Flash starting with version 11.5.
I understand why they're doing that. 11.5 is a key release in that they're deploying a bunch of new features specifically targeting Flash-based games, including 3D acceleration and so on. Basically, to take back some of the way they controlled the market. Before, the way Adobe made their money off Flash was charging for the software to make Flash apps, right? Like Flash CS10 or whatever. But now, with Flex and so on, you can build Flash apps open source, like with open source tools. Some of them from Adobe even. And so they're not necessarily making that much money off people, the mass adoption of Flash. So with their new version, they're basically making a bunch of features, including making it harder for people to hack games through like playing with memory addresses and stuff in Flash, right? People have always been able to cheat at Flash games. And more like 3D acceleration support and so on. But basically, to use these features, you have to buy a separate license from Adobe. So if you're a publisher making Facebook games, you pay Adobe extra, your games run faster.
I see. Now,
and so with these new features in Flash, they want to make sure that A, everybody's Flash supports them, and B, they can fix the bugs in them really quickly, because if you're, say, Playfish, and you're paying Adobe all this money to make your Flash games, then you want bugs in Flash to be fixed right away.
You better get that fixed. I'm paying for this.
But it's probably good news as far as security updates go.
I wonder
having those pushed out as quickly as possible is good.
So IE 10, I believe, I'm not positive, but something around IE, and now we know Chrome enables and builds in Flash by default. I wonder how these browsers will cope with that, because before they were iterating their browser faster than Adobe was iterating Flash, and now it's going to kind of be flipped. Although Adobe actually hasn't committed to any specific rapid release cycle, they just committed to doing more rapid releases.
Right.
So we'll kind of see what happens.
Well, if you've noticed recently, they now try to do an automatic updater instead of a triggered updater.
Yeah.
And by default, does it in the background without prompting, like say all future updates, just install them, don't ask me, is the default option when the update pops up now. And so I think it would just be Adobe taking care of their own updates in the background often and quietly.
Alan, this next story got quite a bit of juice on the TechSNAP subreddit this week. Yes. PHPMyAdmin had itself a bit of drama, and Extreme Tech points out that the compromise in PHPMyAdmin download reinforces the importance of verifying checksums.
Yes. So what happened was one of the SourceForge mirrors, specifically one in Korea, hosted by CD Networks, was somehow compromised, and the tar file of PHPMyAdmin on that server basically had a backdoor added to it where it would allow the attacker to remotely run PHP code, or to use PHP to remotely execute any command that he wanted. Apparently, this file was downloaded by about 400 people. Seeing as it was the Korean mirror, it wasn't that popular. But if they could have got this onto one of the bigger mirrors, it could have been a big kerfuffle. So specifically, yes, on the PHPMyAdmin download page, they always publish like the MD5 or SHA-256 hash of the official version of the tar. And so an important step after you download these is to run the hash on your downloaded copy and make sure it matches. This prevents you from having a corrupted copy and also a compromised copy. The FreeBSD ports tree does this automatically, right? It has the hashes of every file that you might download. And as part of the process, what the ports tree does for you is download the tar file, extract it, run the configure command, apply the patches, and compile it. So after it downloads it, before it extracts it, it compares the checksum. And if it's wrong, it's like, oh, our download must be corrupted. Let's try downloading that again. This way, if a mirror was compromised, it would be detected before it compiled software, unbeknownst to you, including an exploit. But when you're doing it manually, you need to do that yourself. So this one turns out not as bad as it could have been.
Okay.
If that had hit like the major US mirrors or all the SourceForge mirrors instead of just the one in Korea, it could have been a huge problem.
It only takes a few stories like these for tools like this to get a really bad reputation.
Yes, and then the worst part is in this case, PHPMyAdmin kind of has a bit of a reputation like that, mostly because it's one of the most commonly deployed apps. Almost every web server has it, and a lot of those web servers have many iterations old versions.
Yes. Like
sometimes years old versions, and they find an exploit for it and they can attack it. Same as WordPress and Drupal and whatever. And so yes, it's important to keep your PHPMyAdmin updated, and it's important to make sure that the copy you're getting is the authoritative, legitimate copy, not a compromised one. But in this case, the fault doesn't fall on PHPMyAdmin in any way. It seems the problem was actually at SourceForge somewhere, or actually one of the mirrors of SourceForge.
Which they said they're going to look into that.
Yes. So we'll see if we hear anything about it later.
This next story in the roundup is about a vulnerability in Android 4.4, multiple zero-day vulnerabilities, specifically found on the Samsung Galaxy S3, which has an NFC chip that allows attackers to download all data from the Android smartphone security breaches demonstrated during the Mobile Pwn to Own contest in Amsterdam.
Yes. So at the conference, basically they showed that by using the near-field communications chip, they could make the phone basically send all of its data over the near-field communications.
They were also able to upload malicious files to the device, which allowed us to gain code execution on the device.
Yep. So yes, the NFC is basically not locked down enough yet. It's kind of a new thing, and yeah, I don't see this turning out well at all.
You have NFC on your phone, don't you?
I don't actually know.
Okay.
I don't think so. It's rather old, the Nexus S.
I thought that was the first one they did it on.
I don't know that much about it.
I don't know either. All right, Alan, well, our next story in the roundup goes to you, the Passive Splice Network Tap.
Yes, so this is something somebody in the chat room pointed out to me a couple days ago, and basically it's a little set of instructions for tapping an Ethernet line. So basically what it consists of is, you got your regular Ethernet cable, and basically if you cut back a bit of the coating around the outside, you can see the 8 wires inside, the 4 twisted pairs. If you grab a couple of punch-down block things and hook those up to the send and receive pairs, you can basically hook up a machine running like Wireshark and listen in on what's going back and forth across the cable. Comparing this to the regular type of splicing where you would cut the wire and basically build a T into it, this way it doesn't disrupt the connection between the two systems. So basically it can allow you to listen in on traffic across the wire without disconnecting it. So obviously this has all kinds of malicious uses, although it's actually a fairly useful debugging tool as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Although if you're doing it for debugging and it's your gear or whatever, a lot of higher end switches, like managed switches, will have the ability to basically mirror all traffic to a certain switch port to an extra switch port, and then you just plug your laptop into that. And then you can capture all the traffic going back and forth. But in this way, basically you hook up 2 of these punch-down blocks, and you basically get 1 cable for send and 1 for receive, and you can basically see the traffic from both sides into your Wireshark on your laptop or whatever.
Nefarious.
Although it doesn't work for gigabit Ethernet, because gigabit uses all 4 pairs instead of just 2. Although if you just snip and the connection will drop down to 100 megabit because not all 4 pairs are connected, and then you'll be able to listen. Although, if they're using that much bandwidth, they will notice when all of a sudden they don't have enough bandwidth. But most people, that even if they have gigabit connections, are not using the whole gigabit most of the time.
All right, Alan. The next story in the roundup refers back to, it's a bit of a follow-up on that IE zero-day vulnerability story we covered. It looks like some people think Microsoft could have known about the IE security flaw a long time in advance.
Yes. So basically, when Microsoft released their more detailed notes about the flaw, they gave credit for discovering the flaw to the Tipping Point Zero-Day Initiative. And when you go over to their website, according to their information, the most recent documents they sent to Microsoft was July 24th. So basically, when we heard about this flaw from a researcher who discovered it like 2 weeks ago, we expected he would get credit for discovering it. But Microsoft gave credit to someone who discovered it before that. So obviously Microsoft knew or was informed by Tipping Point ahead of time that there was this 0-day. And not until it was starting to be exploited and another researcher backtracked and figured out what the exploit was and reported it to Microsoft and announced it publicly, did Microsoft actually react with the patch.
I hope that's not the case.
It seems that Microsoft has known about the 0-day exploit since July 24th.
I hope that's not the case, Alan. That would
so basically, they knew about it for almost 2 months before they made the patch. And it seems like they only made the patch once it became public that there was a 0-day.
Maybe they were using that time to start working on it. Maybe they had been working on it.
Yeah, so maybe they had been working on it and testing it. The patch did come out awfully quick. Normally, Microsoft's a little slower than that.
Yeah.
So it seems, yes, they were working on it. Although maybe they were just going to include it in the next incremental update, like a bundle, rather than a separate emergency update.
Yeah.
Or there's always the conspiracy theory that these 0-day exploits are being actively used by intelligence agencies, and Microsoft allows that until they become public.
And they maybe give them a heads up and say, we're working on it. You've got about probably a month before, or 2 months before we patch this.
Yeah, so go nutty with it.
Maybe. You never know.
I'm not suggesting that. I'm just saying that's a conspiracy theory one could have.
Right. All right, well, why don't we talk about the next story on the roundup? Forthcoming SSH, boy, that's habit. SHA-3 hash function may be unnecessary. SSH, Alan. SSH. That's just like
SHA.
I know, but SSH is just like all what my brain wants to say when I see an S and an H next to it.
There's no SSH3 yet, alone SSH4.
No, you're right.
But Bruce Schneier, who's a security researcher we've talked a bunch about before, and he's actually one of the finalists in the NIST's competition for deciding on the next hashing algorithm. So his is one of the finalists. There were 64 originally. I think they're down to about 5 now. And soon they're going to announce the winner. And Bruce Schneier is hoping that he doesn't win and that nobody wins. Basically, he says, when they started the contest about 5 years ago, it looked like SHA 256 and 512 were going to be vulnerable to some types of cryptanalysis and that they were going to need a replacement. But basically, at this time, SHA 512 is doing fine and doesn't need to be replaced. So he's hoping that they'll hold off and not announce a new one until it's necessary so that the next new one can be that much more of an improvement. Because basically he thinks if right now they came up with a new SHA-3 algorithm and it's not needed, nobody's going to use it. And it's just going to end up languishing and never getting used.
It's a good point.
So he thinks it's better that they all spend time improving their algorithms until it gets closer to when they're going to need one. And then have SHA-3 come out then.
Okay.
And I think it's kind of a point. If they make a newer standard now and it's not that useful, it'll slowly work into stuff, but it won't be... I don't know that it'll be that useful.
Yeah. I could totally see his point. Absolutely could see it.
Yeah.
All right, before we do the Hall of Shame, why don't we cover the Guild Wars 2 follow-up story?
So we talked about it a couple weeks ago about Guild Wars 2. There was a lot of accounts hacked, although it wasn't actually Guild Wars' fault. What happened is a Guild Wars fan site was compromised, and a lot of users used the same username and password on the fan site as they did on Guild Wars, resulting in their accounts being compromised. So the Guild Wars, one of their guys, I don't know his exact position, but he published a story about it, and it's a long one, and it talks about how hackers steal accounts, how Guild Wars prevents this with things like email authentication, two-factor authentication, password blacklisting, so they know what the common passwords are and they don't allow those to be used.
Very good.
Talks about how database breaches happen and what they do to prevent that, about commerce security, like storing credit cards and so on, different best practices you should follow to make sure you're not compromised, why people attack games in the first place, right? Accounts aren't worth any money if people don't buy accounts. And, stolen gold isn't worth anything if people don't pay gold farmers.
Mm-hmm.
And it basically covers both the game aspects of it and the regular security aspects of it. And it's a good read, I think, for people.
Yeah, it's a fascinating read. And the best practices part's pretty nice, too.
And I think my favorite part was at the one point near the middle or so, they're talking about all these compromises that have happened before. And he basically has a whole sentence where every single word is a link to a different article about a company being compromised.
It's a nice subtle way to prove a point, I think.
It's like, but in recent years, a truly staggering number of game companies and websites have had their account databases breached.
Yeah.
And each one of those words is a separate article about a different incident. And 77 million accounts here, 25 million accounts here, 24 million over here, untold millions over here. And, those databases get very big.
Yeah. All right, so we do have a Hall of Shame submission for this week. So the way the Hall of Shame works is some company does something that's just unbelievable that they need to be shamed into fixing it, then people can submit it with the flare mark, boom, Hall of Shame to our subreddit. And if it gets 10 votes or more, we'll feature it here in the show and submit it into the Hall of Fame. Then one of our Reddit moderators will add it to the sidebar where we will track all of those who have disappointed us. And Alan, the Reddit this week has deemed that Microsoft should be submitted to the Hall of Shame for their secret policy of limiting passwords to 16 characters.
Right. So basically, recently they've when they launched the new Outlook online service, apparently it has a 16-character password limit, and it seems they've basically consolidated their password system. To be, because basically everything's a Microsoft account now, or Passport, or whatever they used to call it.
Yeah.
And basically, when you try to log in with a password that has more than 16 characters, they give you a friendly reminder saying you only need the first 16 characters of your password.
That is very friendly.
Which immediately reminds me of LM hash, the old Windows 98 password hashing algorithm that only used the first 14 characters of your password. Or rather, the hashing algorithm only did the 7 characters, and they actually stored 2 hashes so that your password could be more than 7 characters.
You know why this matters?
The problem with doing 2 7-character passwords like that was that it meant you could crack them concurrently because they weren't using any hashing or any salting. It was just a hash. So on top of the obvious rainbow tables being a lot shorter since they only had to be up to 7 characters, even if you were brute forcing, you could brute force the first half and the second half of the password at the same time.
Right. Now, Creepy Uncle in the chat room argues that this is potentially not Hall of Shame worthy, and I'll tell you why I think it is. Starting with Windows 8, the default choice when you do a clean install is to log into Windows and authenticate to Windows using this Microsoft login ID. So it's effectively limiting the amount of characters you can use on your desktop login. And this one login ID now does everything from your desktop to all of your quote-unquote cloud services that Microsoft hosts. So it's kind of a critical one. It'd be nice to see them step up to things like two-factor authentication and all that kind of stuff.
The real issue here is why 16 characters. If they're doing proper cryptographic password hashing, it doesn't matter how long your input password is.
Right.
It gets hashed down to a string that's a fixed length.
Right. Yeah. So
this means either they're storing your password in plain text, in which case they should literally be lit on fire. I'm almost 100% sure they're not doing that just because how bad that would be.
Right.
The other thing is that they're truncating your password to 16 characters before they hash it. In which case, why? There's no reason to do that. Let people have longer passwords.
Yeah.
There's no reason not to. It's hashed. It doesn't make any sense. And that's why it's so concerning. Because there must be a reason behind it.
Yeah, that's what's worrying.
That's what's scary.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree. All right, Alan. Well, I think that's the whole show right there. We got through it. Now, of course, TechSNAP, it does come out every single week on Thursdays over at JupiterBroadcasting.com. Probably Friday mornings, probably for the majority of you. And you can subscribe and get the show in HD or audio only, which I know a lot of people seem to start in video and then they move over to audio. Like they start, like they just decide like one night, I'm bored, I'm going to watch a video, and they watch it, and then they're like, all right, putting this on my my mobile player because I'm commuting with this sucker. But you can also stream us live. Like I mentioned earlier in the show, we're live at 1 a.m. Pacifics, and 4 p.m. Easterns, right, Alan?
Yes.
And
2000 UTC.
There we go. Over at jblive.tv. And just a reminder, too, we do have the Jupiter Signal newsletter, which actually just went out. But if you subscribe, you can get back edition. Just go over to bit.ly/Jupiter Signal. We just put the new edition out there. Little backstory about those apps that I mentioned at the top of the show. And, stuff
and
like
the bot
that.
in the chat room. And
the bot in the chat room, which is really cool. If you just watch the downloaded shows, you might not know about the cool new bot that we have that lets you get upcoming programming information, lets you automatically suggest titles for the show. The chat room's been doing that as the show goes. And then afterwards, after we get done recording, we go and we all vote on the titles and then potentially pick one of them as the title for the show. So it's a lot of
and
fun.
also, if you're in the chat room, it can tell you when the next show starts, what's currently playing, because a lot of people are watching even just the music on the live stream, and they're like, what song is that?
Yeah, the stream's going 24/7, so it's kind of a neat way to get info about that.
Also, in the newsletter was links to all the hosts' different websites, the stuff they do outside of the shows.
That was cool, too.
In case you're ever wondering, what people from Coda Radio or LAS and so on do.
So,
or what's the other one there?
Unfilter. And
Unfiltered, that's the one.
SciByte.
Heather doesn't have a website. So
no, she has a Twitter profile, though.
Yeah.
She does. But you know what? All of that stuff's in the Jupiter Signal, bit.ly/Jupiter Signal, our once a month newsletter, which I probably should have told you about last week, but I just thought about it now because we just got done working on it. So, and Alan is a big part of that. So thank you to Alan for doing that. All right. Well, I believe we'll wrap it up right there, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to episode 77 of TechSNAP, and we'll be right back here next week.